Okay, so let's move on. One thing to watch out for, the point replicate will get rid of your original attributes, including start frame. So do be sure to copy over the source attributes right there. Once we have that, let's go to our trail source. This is the actual particles that are generated along here. I'm going to pause this video. If you guys check out the Node Bible entry, I talk about all these various settings. Just like we saw in the trail path, this really comes down to tweaking this to whatever you want it to do. And it's just a matter of playing around with the sliders a bit, adding some variation, and you guys should be able to handle that on your own. All right, and with this trail source, we have quite a bit of spikes happening right here. However, one thing that I like to do is I like combining this right here along with another version of the trail path that has different seeds to it. So that will allow some of these spikes to actually be pretty close to each other when this goes to spawn. So right now I'm making a copy of our trail path right here. And all I need to do is change this shape offset to get a completely different version of this. And if I take the combination of these two guys into the trail source, that should allow areas where the spikes are pretty close together. So areas kind of like this right here. I'm actually going to do that a couple of times, turn down the number of points right here, and then I want to prune these spikes based on the collision shape that we originally set for our large plume. So I'll say 20 points right here. I'll make another copy of our trail path, and after doing that, we end up with this. Now, obviously, there are a lot of spikes going on right here, and we don't want to keep all these spikes. So what we'll do is I've brought over the original collision mesh that we used for our large plume. And I also have this guy, which is our terrain. And I also have just another box right here. The idea is that we're going to combine all of these guys. And if any point intersects with these collision meshes right here, then we're going to grow that expansion and get rid of that entire spike. So the way that we can do that is we can create a group SOP before this all hits the trail source where it made the particles. And we're going to take basically all of that stuff and say, okay, if you're inside of the bounding object as a point, then that is the candidate for removing those spikes. We can use a group expand. So set that right there. And we want to select our delete points right there. Our base group is actually the delete points right there. And we will turn up the steps by a lot. So probably like over 100 so that it can select those points which had an intersection with any of these collision primitives along here. So with that being the case, we just blast all this out right here. And once we do that, we end up with this. So only the areas, again, that did not intersect with these guys are left. And I should mention all of these nodes are just modifying the collision mesh right here so that it looks like this. But that now makes sense for our particular explosion with the way that all the plumes are facing in this and that. And so that will help things not look too spherical. It adds a ton of breakup by removing those spikes along here. So now that we have this guy, we are pretty much good to go. I do also want to mention that if we take a look at the source value, it's important to scale this down over time because as the spikes go out, I want the density to decrease as it moves through the air. So as this goes on, it starts at the full value and the entire thing begins fading to black as it gets older, like this. So do be sure that we have that going on. I also want to scale along the actual spike, and that's really the combination of what we see right here. We'll most likely come back and change some of this stuff in the future, but for right now, this is pretty darn good. So let's add some additional breakup through some randomization and noising. So if we create an attribute noise, we can first of all affect position directly, like this. And once we do that, we want to set this to add and 0 centered so that things go in the negative direction. I've found that an amplitude of about 0.4 is pretty good. We want something just generally changing the shape. Nothing too crazy. If you get too small on this, it gets all weird and warbly. But if we have a high element size and just a tad bit of amplitude, that'll make the whole thing feel a bit more organic. I'd also like these points to poof outwards based on the density value. So start off by creating a normal. We're going to use a mountain sop to achieve this. So attribute randomize. We're going to say n for normal, inside sphere because that creates negative values. Then we can set down a mountain sop, which in Houdini 19 is simply an attribute noise that is set to position. So it's pretty similar to what we have up here. However, this noise is going to be along the vector, normal. So as we turn this up, it just poofed everything out. I like using this mountain as well because having a noise like this does add just a bit more variety to the whole thing. So let's take our element size to something around here. I think that's pretty decent. And then let's also have this, again, correlate with the density value. In Houdini 19, this is now the attribute noise instead of the mountain sop. So we cannot rely on height. Instead, we need to rely on this blend parameter right here. This basically blends between the original state and the new state. And so if we say use attributes, then the blend attribute here can be, let's say, height or density or whatever, right? So let's just call this our mask. And then before we hit the mountain, we have this point wrangle, which says that the mask attribute is going to be equal to a ramp that's called mask ramp, and then we will take the complementary value of density. Let's make the ramp right here, and as we can see, we are hitting those areas that are darker. If I didn't say 1 minus density, if it was just density, it would take those white areas and poof that out. So that's why I said 1 minus density right there. Having these things go outwards is going to help it blend into the main cloud of pyro stuff. So that's why we're doing this here. Anyway, in the next video, let's check out how to make this actually work within Axiom.